Welcome back, everyone. So today's speaker is Richard Dudley. He's an adjunct associate professor. He's been with Cornell for 12 years, and he has 25 plus years of experience in international development work, primarily with fisheries and other natural resources. So today he's going to talk about open source access publishing. So Richard, the stage is yours.
Okay, I'll give it a try.
Yep, we can see your screen.
Okay, good. So you maybe wonder why I got interested in open access publishing when my field is really natural resources. And one of the main reasons is that I have been what I refer to in this paper and talk as I've been a peripheral scholar. That's somebody who does not have a permanent position at a real university, as I would call it. I have had such positions in the past, but much of my work was with international projects where I worked for a few years and then went to a different project, or I was connected to a university in the States, but did not really have direct access to their libraries or information that I needed to do my work. And over the course of several years, I realized that I was not the only person in that position, that there are a lot of US scholars at smaller colleges and other institutions that have that same sort of position, or are in that position of not having access to scholarly work that they needed to do their work. And so that's how I got interested. And then I also realized that in other countries, a lot of universities at that time in the 1980s and 90s did not have very good libraries and also did not have access to information they needed to do their work. And that prevented them from really participating in the production of what could be important information. So, let's see there we go. So in this paper was published in a journal which I cited. I'm not sure if I cited here, but at the end you can see the citation. It was a library journal, and it's an open access, diamond open access or platinum open access, which means it's free to read and free to publish. And that's something that I want to talk about today. Generally, we think of academic knowledge as being something like this, where we have a body of, let me get my pointer, a body of knowledge that people can use. And this we build our research on what's already known. I think this is a very common concept. And ultimately, that research that we do may create new information, and then that new information becomes available to other researchers. So this has been going on for hundreds and hundreds of years. The problem is that it costs money nowadays. In the old days, people exchanged letters, and we hear about Darwin and writing a letter to his friend about his ideas. And but nowadays it's mostly done via scholarly journals and books, and those cost money. And with journals, there are subscription costs. On the other hand, there's also the question of the cost to publish findings. And that's what I'm going to talk about, is this whole system and how it's evolved over the years. The early years, this is a picture of a guy named Paul Ginsberg. Some of you may know who he is. He's the founder of Archive. In the early years, in the 80s and 90s, drafts, and in fact a lot earlier than that, physicists and mathematicians in particular shared preprints among themselves to get feedback on work that they were actually doing. In 1991, Ginsberg created what is now called Archive when he worked at Los Alamos National Laboratory. And that was a preprint sharing system online. Paul Ginsberg is currently at Cornell. He's still involved with Archive. He's a theoretical physicist. Archive now holds over around 2 million preprints and gets 10,000 new preprints per month. So it's kind of amazing. They're not peer reviewed at all. So anything can be on there, but in spite of that, most of the people in physics and mathematics still use it as a way of sharing their information, getting it out there online. And publishers have now accepted the fact that people can make that preprint, but they can still publish it in a journal later. Keep pushing the wrong button here. So going back to this, this diagram. So these are the early years, the use of World Wide Web and internet. And these early archives basically established the practicality of doing this sort of thing. This was in the mid-1990s. By the late 90s and early 2000s, there were a couple of online journals, open access online journals. One of them was Ecology and Society. One was in 2003, the journals of the Public Library of Science went online. And so this reinforced the use of the credibility of open access as a practical platform. And this started a feedback that made more open access journals available, further increasing the credibility of these journals. Nowadays we think, of course they're practical, but back in even around 2000, 2005, not everybody was on board with open access. And in fact, I remember presenting to the System Dynamics Society in the business meeting saying, well, why isn't our journal open access? And people were going, well, it's not really a practical thing and so forth. So another element of this is the idea of knowledge as a public good, which goes back hundreds of years. And so that's another thing that reinforces this whole idea of open access. The thing that really kicked it off in the early 2000s, late 1990s, was the rising price of subscription journals. This became completely ridiculous even for universities like Cornell. I remember probably around 2010, they circulated they circulated a list showing how much money they spent on the different journal subscriptions, and it was in the millions. It was something like 75% of their budget was for journal subscriptions. It's a big library. So this was a major push to get libraries pushing for open access. And the funding agencies, as a lot of you know, also started supporting open access because they felt, look, we're paying for this, we're paying for this research, and then the researchers are having to buy it back via journal subscriptions or per article charges. So they basically forced, and this is still going on, this is still ongoing. In the US, I think it's mostly pretty well established that you have to publish in an open access journal or have your information somehow available. There was also active promotion of open access, and these are a couple of the sites you can examine. The second one there is the Directory of Open Access Journals. So you can look at that and find out if a journal is considered, if it's open access, and if it's on that list, it's probably not a predatory journal, which I'll talk about in a little bit. Predatory journals are a problem that come with open access. So In addition to this, then the benefits to authors started to become more clear. At first, people were saying, well, we need open access so we can get the articles. But now people realized, if I publish open access, I get more visibility. If I get more visibility, I get more citations. Maybe I'll actually get promoted. So people began to realize this is actually not only good just to get the information to do my work, but it's also good for me to get my work out there so I can actually do, make myself and my work better known. At first, there was some question about the citation benefit because most researchers who cited work were working at institutions that had good libraries. So this data, there's a lot of research being done on this, and the data originally said the citation benefit was sort of marginal, but they felt that that was an artifact of the fact that in the recent past, people who cited work were people who worked at universities that had libraries that they could access. So ultimately, this became a benefit to other researchers as well. It didn't originally have that benefit. One of the other things that came out of this at this time was the early, well, around 2010, 2015, I guess, was this idea of self-archiving, where you could make your information open by putting it on your own website, or more reasonably on a website of, let's say, your employer or your university. They have a place where, and a lot of universities, I think, require that. And if you have public publications, they're supposed to be on the university archive, so other people can access it. This had an unintended consequence of affecting the use of traditional journals. Let's see, the self-archiving. So traditional journals here, I'm using that term to mean subscription journals. Now we know now a lot of subscription journals are also open access, and they're what we call hybrid journals. So hybrid journal has some articles open access and some are still only subscription. So I think System Dynamics Review, for example, is still a hybrid journal. I don't think all articles in it are open access. So some of them you can't get unless you have a subscription or have access to a library. So the self-archiving actually allowed the continued use of these subscription journals. They could satisfy the open access requirement of their employer or their funder, but still publish in these hybrid journals. This is changing. So what happened in the longer run and over the from 2010 up through the current time, journals felt they were going to be losing income. Now, some of these journal publishers are immensely profitable. There's some very interesting articles, I've cited them in the article, about that issue of the profitability of these companies. And they said, well, we're going to need to do something to make up for the lost revenue of subscriptions, because we're going to lose subscriptions as open access grows. And what they did was they created a pay-to-publish model. And that's the standard model now. When you publish a paper open access, you pay extra, and it's quite expensive. So they have the pay-to-publish journals. This created a whole new feedback system whereby you had this, the pay-to-publish journals became the standard. Acceptance of the pay-to-publish model became, well, it was accepted. Okay, and that made the income, publishers' income, some say it's even higher than it was before. They didn't really lose out at all. And in theory, that would mean the price of subscriptions would go down, but that's not really what's happened. So we have this whole new system. And what's happened here is the part that I was sort of got interested in after I started looking into this was these so-called predatory journals. Pay to publish, because now you can say, well, I'll publish your paper and you give me $100. That's a lot cheaper than the $5,000 charged by some journals. And so I can set up my little journal, the system dynamics of the real world. So I'll set up my journal, system dynamics of the real world. And if you publish in it, I just set up a website, get some people who know about that kind of stuff. And I can, get people to pay me, let's say, I'll publish your paper for $500 instead of $5,000. I'll still make some money out of it. You can see there might be some incentive there to do that. So I will make a few comments about that I stuck in here. This term was originally coined by a librarian at the University of Colorado named Jeffrey Beal. He really got on his high horse with this and published a bunch of papers on predatory journals and created a list of predatory journals, Beal's list of predatory journals. You can look it up now on the internet, and it still exists. It's no longer hosted by him, but there's a number of similar organizations. He got in a lot of trouble. He ultimately lost his job because his university wouldn't support him. Some of these publishers wanted to sue him, wanted to sue his university because he was defaming them. I mean, he did go a little bit too far, and so he got in some trouble. You can look his name up on Wikipedia as well, and there's a little article about the stuff he did and some responses to it and criticisms of his work. But these journals do exist, and there are a lot of them. So there's a definition I put here that I got from a recent, a couple of year old article. And so it's still an issue that's ongoing. These are real problems. There are some publishers that also create phony meetings. They will give you, I'm so sure some of you have gotten, email invitations to give a paper or give a keynote talk at some meeting that you never heard of. And some of the publishers are promoting those meetings, and then they publish the proceedings, and it only costs you $1,500 to register and so forth. So anyway, that's predatory journal issues. Now, there's another issue that came up, started in Europe, in the EU, promoted by a number of research funders called Plan S. And there is a website for Plan S. It basically wanted all articles to be open access. And they were pushing, so similar to what the US government did, requiring all research to be published open access. One of the differences was that these could not be hybrid journals. So all the subscription journals would be not allowed. This caused a lot of problems for, it's still going ahead, still moving forward, and you can read about it on Wikipedia, or you can go to their website of Coalition S and see what they're trying to do. But the question, is why would authors oppose Plan S? And it has to do with this reputation of authors and use of established journals. So if somebody came and told you, oh, sorry, you can no longer publish in, let's say, System Dynamics Review, and you normally publish there, you'd say, well, wait a minute, that's bad for my reputation. Or if there are journals that your department or your agency expects you to publish in, and they happen to be a hybrid journal, one that has a subscription, and then Plan S would say, oh, you can no longer do that. And we won't fund, these funding agencies will no longer give you money if you publish in those journals. So there were a lot of reasons for that. It was mostly this. Some other issues were that some of those journals some of the journals published by professional societies are quite often supported by the journal subscriptions. So there's a danger for especially smaller professional societies, that they would no longer be able to get the income they expected from these journals. So they're trying to work this out, but Plan S is still going forward. So a lot of it's based on this important link of the reputation. And there's another whole issue there that I'll mention later, where there's a whole group that's saying the way we measure research importance is wrong. It's not, when you're going up for promotion or something like that, it's where did you publish your articles rather than what was in the article. So there's a whole group called Adora, which I'll mention later if I have time. So let me see, where are we going here? So this is sort of the new situation. We have use of open access via the pay-to-publish model. It's sort of a recap of what we had before, but a different sense, linking in this established publishers business. So we have the benefits of OA still promoting, still affecting the importance of open access, but we also have this established publishers. So there's a real sort of a reinforcing system that is sort of almost forcing people to continue publishing via these established publishers. It's not like a whole bunch of new journals popped up that were open access, but this pay to publish model has really solidified and made it much more likely that these big publishers remain big. This is, as in the past, has really helped these isolated scholars, or peripheral scholars as I call them. They're sometimes called nomads, scholarly nomads who move from one position to another. But the trouble is that what's happened is the article processing charges continue to go up. The profits of the journals continue to go up. A number of interesting things happen. The journals have become very good at using their that data they have on all these different articles. And the journal websites are really wonderful now. You can go to the website and you look at one article and it immediately gives you links to other similar articles. You can go to the website and it will, in the literature cited, there are links directly to the literature cited, so you don't have to go looking for it. You just click on it and you go immediately to that article. So they're really establishing themselves as the owners of intellectual property, in a sense. And libraries and some scholars think that's something to worry about. There's these criticisms pushed for, created mandates for more open access reform, including this Plan S. But another unintended consequence of this was the provision of funding to pay for these article processing charges. So like Cornell University, and I'm sure other universities, have a fund. So if you want to publish an article, they will say, oh, we will help you pay for that, or we'll pay for it out of the special fund if you don't have it written into your research contract. And so basically the reform further solidifies the pay to publish model. So it's really the standard now. If you want to publish an article, I don't know if you have how you all think about that, but it'd be interesting to hear that. So let's see where we're going next. Okay, this is going back to the use of substandard and predatory publishers. So this part, this open access model where you have to pay to publish, it increases the isolation of these peripheral scholars because they can't afford to do that. I would never have been able to afford to do it. When I was even attached to a university working overseas, I wasn't really in the loop at the university. I mean, I might have, if I begged them, they might have done that. But if you're at a small college, let's say, and you wouldn't have that money. Or if you're in a field that's not well funded, perhaps the journals in those fields are cheaper, but you don't have the money. If you're at a small university in Indonesia or in Zambia or Nairobi or someplace like that, you probably don't have the money to pay that. So you are pushed toward looking for a journal that's cheaper and may not be as good, these predatory publishers. So then I started thinking about, well, what about, there are some journals where you don't have to pay. You don't have to pay to publish, and they're not subscription. They're what we call platinum open access, although now I see it's been changed. They're now calling it diamond open access. So these are journals where you can publish for free and you can read for free, and you have to ask, how do they do that? It's magic, right? So how do they do that? But there are quite a few. Some of them are very small, specialized journals, but there are some regular ones. And another problem with them is this prevalence of this pay-to-publish model makes that sort of not necessary. You know, it sort of decreases the likelihood that you're going to do that because everybody's publishing pay to publish, and they're paying the article processing fees. So there's no real demand for this, except among people who can't publish. So that's the sort of the situation. So is platinum open access possible? Well, maybe. There are examples that I looked for some examples, some I was aware of. Fishery Bulletin has been published by the US government for probably 50 years, and it's a good quality fisheries journal. These others I found on the journal, the directory of open access journals, World Systems, anyway, the information's there as to where they came from and who publishes them. I looked at them all, and they seem legitimate to me. There are tools for testing legitimacy. Scholarly Society that publishes this. How they actually fund it, I'm not sure. And then some are supported by foundations. This particular one, Conservation and Society, when I first looked at it, was published in, I believe, Australia. Last time I looked, that link was no longer any good. So, and this one looks like it's in India. Is IN India? I can't remember if it's India. So then there's also possibility of donation and endowments, but they're not very many. Now it's called Diamond. Free to read, free to publish, now called Diamond Open Access. Many small journals, especially those published by professional societies. There's an article that came out recently, very recently, that I looked at the other day. It's a very interesting article. Often these journals don't satisfy Plan S details. I didn't talk about details, but they have certain requirements that journals that will comply with Plan S are, they have to make sure that there has to be a way in which this information will remain online. So archiving. So small organizations may not have the ability to ensure that things are archived properly and available in the future. So that's one of the issues. And to a certain extent, it may be difficult to separate out these small journals from predatory journals that are just in existence to make money. So I think that's all I've got to say, and except I don't have questions, I have questions, so these are my questions. So I'm not.
Yeah, thank you, Richard. This is really informative. So one question I have is, you know, from the predator journals, are they just, so when they take your money, do they still publish and go through the reviewing process, or? Oh, okay.
Yeah, they will. Well, most of them do, not all of them. Some of them will just take your money and disappear. You'll never see them again. But yeah, most of them, they have a website and you look at the papers, but there's no peer review, or very little. I mean, but it's like that question, that last slide. What's just a bad journal and what's a predatory journal? The predatory journals are there to make money only. They don't really care about the content. Now I quite often look at, I see links and I click on the links if there's an article about fisheries in Indonesia, because I work there. And there are a lot of bad papers. And there are a lot of bad system dynamics papers also, because there are a lot of interest in system dynamics modeling in Indonesia, but not a lot of, there's some that are very good, but there's quite a few that are not very good. And there's no, there's no quality control. And I think a lot of these journals are published by universities. They're online journals published by universities in Indonesia. I mean, I'm familiar with those because I have looked at them, and they're unfortunately, a lot of them are not very good. There's some that are okay, some that are quite good. So I wanted to leave these questions up there. Let me see if I can end this slideshow and still keep that up there somehow. Yeah. So I'm not sure I can stop presenting. Yeah, oh, there you are. So, Allison, what do you think?
I think you've gone down a really productive rabbit hole here, and I've always believed in open access, just because even if we just want interested parties of the public to be reading things, and the restrictions in universities, I mean, it's gotten to the point, with WSU, that I can find a few things that sort of are in my realm. But searches in the library is onerous. It's just trying to get it. Google works much better than our library search engine.
Yeah.
It's like you have to be trained, and librarians come to classes and train students to use the library system. And I'm like, good grief.
No, I have the same feeling.
If something's not open access for me and I go to the library, it'll often take me 10 minutes to get to whatever it is I need to go to. Sometimes it's even easier just to go through Wiley or something like that. But, I think disseminating information is so important, and it shouldn't just be available to people with subscriptions.
Yeah. So you're a big supporter of open access.
I am. And I hadn't thought, I get calls all the time for probably these predatory journals talking about that have their predatory conferences, esteemed author, blah, blah, blah. But they're sort of easy to spot, I think, in a lot of ways. But this whole issue of disseminating information and the quality of the journal that you're in based on somebody's idea of what quality journals are and getting promoted because of that, I think, is also problematic in some ways.
Yeah, this is this thing I have. I guess you can't see it. There's a thing called Adora. The San Francisco Declaration on Research Assessment. Mm-hmm. And it was at a scientific meeting. A bunch of people got together and said the way they were trying to get people to sign on to this agreement that there's a better way to assess research and people's research output rather than where they published. Look at the article rather than, but that's very time consuming if it's a person has 100 or 50 articles. I don't have to worry about that. So. Yeah, but there's a bunch of things like that. And do you ever use? There is there's archive, but there's also one called bioarchive, which is about biology, includes ecology and stuff like that. Ever heard of it, but know anybody who actually uses it?
No.
I don't either. But they also get thousands of preprints, and I'm sure there's a lot of junk in there. But Ginspard wrote an article about this. Well, he's written several. He's still on the board of directors of both of them. And, his view is, well, we can't, these are not peer reviewed. They're not meant to be peer reviewed. But if you know the authors and what they're working on, you can search for their names and see what they put up there recently. And you can contact them and you can comment on their articles. So you get a preview of what they're working on, and they have the protection of having it already in a preprint. So they're more likely to put it up there because it's not something, it can't be stolen basically, because if you steal that, it's plagiarizing. It's in theory, you can't do that. Yeah.
Right.
So anyway, I got interested in this a couple of years ago for the reasons I mentioned. I was thinking, another reason I got into it was my daughter teaches she teaches literature at a small college in South Carolina, private college. Actually, it's quite a nice place. And for her, it doesn't matter too much because it's really a teaching position. And although she publishes occasionally, it's not stuff that is required for her work. But she has colleagues who teach ecology, who teach biology or entomology, botany, stuff like that. And they do have to publish, I'm sure. And they're actually very good scientists. I've met some of them, they're really interesting people. And we always sort of think, well, the really good students are going to be going and teaching at big universities. But I'm sure from the difficulty your students have finding jobs, that they may end up in all sorts of places. But people have things to offer. So how do they do that if they can't publish? And I mean, not everything is in publishing, but some of it is. If they have things to offer, what do they do?
Yeah, I mean, in the way that we're churning out PhDs, I mean, that was on several years ago for an ecologist. And, we had, I don't know, 105 applications. 104 of them were qualified to our minimum qualifications. And, so here we are churning out all these PhDs who have to go someplace else. And a lot of them are going to go into consulting or work for the government or something like that. Or, perhaps it's not as important if they're publishing, but still having access, I think, is critical.
Yeah, to do your job.
Yeah.
I mean, that was one of the things that got to me when I first went. I didn't teach. I was advising at a small college in Sumatra. Well, it's actually not a small one. It's like a state university in Sumatra, for one of the provinces there. And it was early on in this project, and they were developing a marine science program. And the students came to us and said, well, we want to get, at that time, we were very lucky that the Canadian government had just completed a project on ecology of Indonesia. And it was a series of books on each of the islands. So there was a book, brand new at that time, Ecology of Sumatra, and it was published in both English and in Indonesian. And so that was all we had, really. That was that book. But it cited a bunch of literature. Because the people who wrote it, cited literature. But we didn't have any access to that literature. So we got the students, and sometime, to a certain extent on their own, they wrote to the authors of these different articles and started a reprint collection on their own. So they instead of doing it as individuals, they tend to do it there as groups. So they formed a group called the Shrimp Club, and the Shrimp Club became the source of literature for the other students. Because the library had books, but they didn't have literature like that. And these were undergraduates. Some of them were very, they probably sold the information, knowing how to operate. The other thing that I realized at that time is one of the ways in which faculty at that time differentiated themselves from other faculty or from students is by hoarding information. So books were locked up in file cabinets.
Wow.
I asked, I was the guy, one of my colleagues there, he was teaching a course in mangrove ecology, so I was supposed to try to help him, And I said, well, do you have any books on mangrove ecology? And he says, oh yeah, we have some books. so that they're locked in the file cabinet. They're not in a library, but the reason they're not in the library is because they're in the library, somebody will steal them. And the same thing happened to me when I first went to Indonesia. At that time, there was a series of 5 volumes for identifying fish of Southeast Asia. Well, it wasn't, there's a separate group for the Pacific and the Indian Ocean side. There's a separate set of books because that's how FAO divides up the world, you know, the Pacific Ocean, Indian Ocean. And anyway, I saw these books on this guy's shelf. I mean, I had been given a set by a guy in Washington, D.C. in those days. Now you can get it all online. The whole 5 volumes I have it on PDF, and you can just search through it for different fish. You know? These are like line drawings for easy, not detailed, but easy identification of commercially important species. And he had them locked in his office on his shelf. And I asked my counterpart, I said, well, so-and-so has those books in his office. He goes, he just shook his head. He says, yeah. He says, but we can't use them. It's crazy. Because anyway. But now it's different. Now everything's completely changed because everybody has access to this information. But the trouble is there's a lot of crummy information being produced as well. And that's the other bad side of these predatory journals. That stuff is just as accessible as the good stuff. I don't know. There's no real answer for that. Anyway.
So Richard, you mentioned the U.S. government a little bit. So within DOE, when we publish, I think there's some sort of agreement between the U.S. government and the publishers that within the first year, you know, they like it's an embargo period where the publishers to get money from subscription, and then after 1 year, then the U.S. government can release the information, not in the format of the journal, but we turn in like the accepted version.
They're still doing it that way?
Yeah, so it's in
ASCII.gov.
ASCII.gov.
Required it to be, because some of the things I've been reading is that this embargo business is going by the wayside. You're not going to have that anymore. I don't know what the U.S. government is, but certainly Plan S. The Plan S rules are what you can find on their website. They don't allow any embargoes, especially if you're paying open access fee, article processing charge. But these must be for subscription journals.
Yeah, so I just put in the chat the ASCII.gov, so it's under the Department of Energy. So you search for something, and then it's published. It has the published information, and then you can, if it's over 1 year, you can have access to the article.
For a lot of research, that's probably fine, but for things in biomedical things where you're, you know, the latest information on COVID, you don't want to wait a year. It'll be obsolete.
True. And Richard, your presentation has a lot of good links. So can we have that slide deck so we can check out some of the links?
Yeah, I sent you a copy of the article itself, didn't I?
Yeah,
I originally gave a talk at a System Dynamics meeting, but then I published it in the journal, get this, the Journal of Librarianship and Scholarly Communication. It's a platinum open access. And it's when I first saw the title, I was thinking like, yeah, I don't know. But when I looked at it, it's obviously a real journal. And the people are librarians at, I think, University of North Carolina. And I mean, the editors were there, and I forget somewhere else. I dealt with several people. They hadn't had any papers with lots of diagrams like that. So they were a little bit surprised to see something come up to them that had all these figures.
Yeah.
So I'll send you that again. It's not hard. I'm gonna have it here.
Richard, you said platinum again, and before you said diamond. Are they used interchangeably, or is there a difference?
Say that again.
Is there a difference between platinum and diamond open access? Is it the same?
No, as far as I know, it's the same. I just, in one of the articles I read just the other day, I was looking through this and thought I kept looking up. I get stuck looking things up. You know, I have a question in my mind and then I spend the next hour reading things. And as far as I could tell, they just used a different term. So it means the same thing as far as I know. So I think we're stuck with pay to publish. It's going to be with us forever. I don't think Diamond, Platinum Open Access is really going to go anywhere on a large scale, but I think it's possible that it could become more common. I think these problems facing peripheral scholars are going to continue. I don't see any easy solution to that. And I'm not sure how you're going to limit predatory publishing either, because if you can make money by creating a journal and charging people to put their papers in it, it's fairly easy to do. And there's some big, you're familiar with Sustainability, the journal, and that's published by MDPI.
Yep.
MDPI, I think. So I looked them up today. They were originally on Beale's list, and they were one of the publishers that challenged him. They weren't the ones that tried to sue him. That was a different publisher which deserved to be on his list. But MDPI, there was I can't remember where I saw it. There's another organization where
MDPI seems to be a mixed bag. Like some of their journals are okay, and some of them people feel they're sort of predatory. Depends
exactly. They're sort of mixed. And this article, apparently they have put a huge amount of effort into growing their business. And they are now the 4th or 5th largest publisher in the world of academic publishing. And that's this article I just saw today. I don't think I cited it in the talk anywhere, but they showed a bar graph of how fast it's grown. I can send that to you too if you want to look at it. I just sent it to someone else. Carol was out talking to some friends yesterday, and they were talking about sustainability because they were thinking of publishing there or wondering about the quality of the journal. And when she came home, I was reading an article about MDPI. So she says, "Oh, you have to send that to so and so." Anyway, yeah. So it's interesting. Bunch of interesting questions that are going to be with us for a while, I guess.
So Alison, quick question for you, because you believe in the open access model. So when you publish, are you willing to pay? Because somebody has to pay for it, right?
Yeah, and I mean, we have had it built, these publishing fees built into grants. As a reviewer, I get free publishing. So if you're, for every paper I review for certain journals, they'll give me a credit towards a paper.
Okay.
Yeah, that's another trick that some of these journals are using. If you publish with them, then you get a discount.
Yeah.
I guess that's worth it. I don't know.
The MDPI does that.
So the WSU doesn't have an account that you can tap into for that?
I don't know.
Yeah. I think that's true for a lot of people at universities. They, especially a big university, you have no idea what all the opportunities are that are there.
A lot of universities don't have such accounts, though. Some do and some don't.
Uh-huh.
I have a friend who just finished a postdoc, and the grant ended, and they're requiring her to publish her papers, but they say the grant's ended, so they can't pay for it. She has to pay for it.
Yeah, that I can see that happening, especially on short-term grants and contracts. It's over. Books are closed. Too bad. Yeah.
And there's no account at the university to pay for it either. So.
Well, you can go on the directory of open access journals is actually pretty well. It's a little clunky, but you can search for not just for open access journals, but you can search for open access journals that do not have a article processing fee. So you can do a search on that. In fact, that's how I found this journal that I published this thing in. I'm pretty sure I found it that way. I looked at a bunch of them, and some of them looked like, you know, that doesn't, not what I want to do. But for me, it doesn't matter. I mean, if it's a journal that's not at the top rank, it doesn't, I don't really care because I'm retired, basically. But if they're open access, then you can always, once it's published, you can, you know, put the link anywhere you want and people have access. So this one already has a, you know, it's a lot of, you know, I would think nobody would ever read that journal, but, you know, it has the statistics of how many people have downloaded the paper and how many people have looked at it and downloaded the citation and stuff. And it's quite a lot. I was very surprised in less than a year. I think this issue of visibility of papers. I mean, in the past, you know, you published something. I remember talking to a colleague in fisheries a number of years ago, and I must have been already interested in this question about who reads these papers. And he had read an article that someone had done research on how many times papers were cited, and it was like the vast majority of papers at that time were never cited, except by the authors. And it's probably true back in the 1970s, where, I mean, when I was a student, you know, you couldn't get, I mean, and I was at Cornell, so there was a big library, but even if you're at the library, it's not that easy to find the articles you need to read. You know, in those days, it's so much more interesting now, and you get all this stuff that you can learn very quickly, or think you can learn very quickly enough to think you know something that you don't actually know. I've been reading up on blood clotting agents recently in you know, biomedical journals, and the blood clotting cascade. It's a biomedical thing for personal reasons. Because I'm on various drugs that affect my blood clotting capability. So I wanted to figure out what was happening. Yeah, you can do that. There's a whole biochemistry, it's called Biochemistry Free-for-All. It's a book on Open University in the UK. And one of the chapters is on blood clotting. So they have a whole chapter on that to get me started, and then I can go to all these journals, open access. Although the medical people, I think a lot of their stuff is, well, it's less open access and it's much more expensive. I think Cell and Lancet, their article processing charges are $7,000 and $10,000 per article. So who's paying for that? It's the drug companies. Although they probably don't publish. That's all their stuff is probably internal secret.
Right.
Yeah. Anyway, it's neither here nor there, I guess.